The sharp crack of a gunshot punched the air from Rosalie Chen's lungs. Across the dusty main street of Redemption, the glass window of the Redemption Savings and Trust exploded outward in a glittering spray. A woman screamed a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the sudden panicked shouts of men and the frantic whinny of a spooked horse. Rosalie stood frozen behind the counter of Chen's Mercantile, a half-folded bolt of calico clutched in her hands. The familiar comforting scent of dried apples, leather, and lye soap was suddenly thick with the acrid tang of gunpowder and fear. Another shot rang out, this one aimed at the sky, a percussive warning that scattered the few townsfolk on the boardwalk like quail flushed from a thicket. A man in a dark duster, his face obscured by a grimy bandana, burst from the bank's splintered doorway, a heavy canvas sack slung over his shoulder. He moved with a brutal, efficient grace, his boots thudding against the wooden planks as he sprinted for a horse tethered at the hitching post. Time seemed to warp, stretching thin, and then snapping back into sharp focus. Rosalie saw details with a crystalline clarity, the way the outlaw's spurs caught the midday sun and the raw power in the horse's haunches as it reared the frantic, wide-eyed terror of Mr. Abernathy, the bank teller, who now stumbled out onto the boardwalk, his hands raised in surrender. The outlaw swung himself into the saddle, his movements a blur of practiced violence. As he yanked the reins, urging the horse into a gallop, something small and silver slipped from his coat pocket, arcing through the air and landing in the thick dust of the street with a soft, unnoticed thud. In a cloud of red grit and thundering hooves, he was gone, disappearing down the road that led west into the vast, indifferent expanse of the territory. For a long moment, the street was held in a spell of shocked silence. Then chaos erupted anew. Doors flew open. Sheriff Brody emerged from his office, his gun drawn too late. People rushed toward the bank, their voices a rising tide of questions and exclamations. Rosalie, however, couldn't take her eyes off the small, gleaming object in the street. It lay there, half buried in the dust, winking at her like a fallen star. Without thinking, she untied her apron, dropped it on the counter, and slipped out the door, her movements quiet and unnoticed amidst the town's collective alarm. She knelt in the dirt, her fingers closing around the object. It was warm from the sun. As she brushed away the dust, her breath hitched a painful, ragged sound in her throat. Her blood ran cold, a glacial current freezing her from the inside out. It was a locket, a small silver oval intricately engraved with a pattern of climbing roses. On the back, worn smooth by years of touch, were two initials, A.C. Amelia Chen, her mother. The locket was a ghost, a memory made solid. Her father had been forced to pawn it 6 months ago, one of the last precious things they owned, to pay the interest on a debt so staggering it felt like a physical weight on their family. He had promised her he would get it back, but Rosalie knew it was a hollow promise, the kind men make when hope is the only currency they have left. She had grieved its loss, as she had grieved her mother all over again. And now, here it was dropped by a bank robber in his hasty escape. The connection was immediate, undeniable, and terrifying. The locket wasn't just a random piece of loot from the bank's safe deposit boxes. The pawn shop was 2 towns over. There was only one way this outlaw could have possessed it. He must have robbed the pawnbroker, or he was connected to the man her father owed, the man who held their entire future in the palm of his hand. She clutched the locket so tightly, the delicate engraving bit into her palm. This wasn't just a robbery. This was a message, a shadow falling over their already precarious lives. This was a piece of her past stolen, and then dropped at her feet, a harbinger of a future she could no longer control. The dust of redemption settled around her, but inside Rosalie a storm had just begun to rage. That evening, the Mercantile was a cage of suffocating silence. The robbery was the only topic of conversation in town, but inside their small home behind the shop, the subject was a locked door Rosalie was afraid to open. Her father, Thomas Chen, sat at the kitchen table, his hands trembling as he counted the day's meager earnings. He looked older than his 50 years, the failed mining venture having carved lines of perpetual worry into his face and leached the strength from his once sturdy frame. Papa, Rosalie began, her voice quiet. She held the locket out on her open palm. I found this in the street after the robbery. Thomas's eyes, usually clouded with a distant exhaustion, snapped into sharp focus. He stared at the locket, and a flicker of something shame-fear regret crossed his features before being replaced by a carefully constructed mask of indifference. A coincidence, he muttered, his gaze dropping back to the coins. He must have stolen it from the bank. He didn't, Rosalie insisted, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. Mr. Abernathy said the robber only took cash from the teller's drawer. He never went near the safe deposit boxes. This was in his pocket, Papa. Your debt? Is it to someone dangerous? All debts are to someone dangerous. Thomas said, his voice clipped. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were cold. The debt is to Marcus Thornfield, a rancher, a respectable man, not a common thief. Put it away, Rosalie. It's a bad omen. But Rosalie knew better. Her father was a master of evasion, of telling half-truths that were more misleading than outright lies. The locket was not an omen. It was a clue, a thread in a tapestry of desperation she was only just beginning to see. Later that night, long after her father had gone to bed, Rosalie sat by her window, the locket cool against her skin. Tomorrow, her cousin Isabella was supposed to arrive. Beautiful, charming, vivacious Isabella, who had spent the last year back east at a finishing school paid for, with the last of their family's savings. She was returning to marry Marcus Thornfield, the very man her father claimed was respectable in a match arranged to settle the crippling debt from the mine. Rosalie had never met this rancher, but Isabella's letters had painted him as a grim older widower, with a young daughter, a man more interested in acquiring a mother for his child than a wife for himself. Isabella had chafed at the arrangement, her letters filled with dramatic pronouncements of her impending doom. But she had agreed. For the family. Rosalie traced the engraved roses on the locket. It felt like holding the last remnant of a life that was about to be swept away. She was the quiet one, the responsible one, the daughter who had stayed home to tend the store and her father's failing health while Isabella chased dreams of a grander life. Rosalie's world was small, contained within the walls of the mercantile and the pages of her books. Now even that small world felt threatened, the foundations cracked by a debt she didn't incur and a danger she couldn't name. The pre-dawn light was a weak gray promise when the shouting began. It wasn't her father's voice. This was Isabella, sharp and furious, followed by Thomas's low pleading tones. Rosalie pulled on her robe, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and crept into the parlor. Isabella stood in the center of the room, already dressed for travel, her face a mask of defiant fury. Her trunk was by the door. I will not do it, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. I will not be sold like cattle to some backwoods rancher to pay for your mistakes. It is not a mistake, it is a debt of honor, Thomas countered, his face ashen. Thornfield was my partner in the mine. When it failed, he covered my losses. This marriage is the only way to repay him, to save our name. Our name, Isabella laughed a bitter, ugly sound. Our name is Mud Uncle, and I will not spend the rest of my life buried in it. I have my own plans. I'm going west to California. You can't, Thomas pleaded, his voice cracking. He's expecting you tomorrow. The arrangements are made. If you don't show, he'll call in the note. We'll lose everything. The store, this house. Rosalie. Isabella's gaze flickered to Rosalie, who stood frozen in the doorway. For a moment her expression softened, but it was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. Rosalie will be fine. She's strong. Stronger than you think. She picked up a small traveling bag. I have left a note. It's kinder than this conversation. She walked to the door, then paused her back to them. I am sorry, Uncle, but I cannot live a life that is not mine to choose. And then she was gone, and the closing of the door, a final definitive sound that echoed in the sudden crushing silence. Rosalie stared at the spot where her cousin had stood her mind, struggling to process the magnitude of the disaster. Thomas Chen crumpled into a chair, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, desperate sobs. The note Isabella had mentioned lay on the table, a crisp, white rectangle of betrayal. Rosalie walked over to her father, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. "Papa," she whispered, "what are we going to do?" He looked up, and when she saw his face, Rosalie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The despair was gone, replaced by a terrifying, calculating gleam she had never seen before. He was looking at her, but it was as if he were seeing a solution, a replacement part for a machine that had just broken. "Get up, Rosalie," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Now." He dragged her from the parlor and into her small bedroom, his hands rough with a greed born of sheer desperation. She would take her cousin's place, he was muttering more to himself than to her. Because debts don't disappear, and neither do the kind of men who collect them. He stopped in the middle of her room, turning to face her, his eyes wild. "You will take her place." The words hung in the air, monstrous and unbelievable. "Papa, no," Rosalie breathed, backing away. "You can't mean it. He's expecting Isabella. He's never even met me. He'll know." How will he know? Thomas's voice rose, hardening into the cold determination of a cornered animal. "He's never seen either of you. He's only read her letters. As far as he knows, he's getting a Chen daughter for his bride, and that's exactly what he'll get. You're the same age. You have the same color hair. It will work." "But I'm not her," Rosalie cried, her voice trembling. "She's beautiful. She's charming. She knows how to talk to people, how to be the wife of a rich man. I can't." "You will learn," Thomas snapped, grabbing her shoulders, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Listen to me. If I don't deliver a bride to Thornfield, he will ruin us. Do you understand? This house, the shop, everything gone. Men like him don't make idle threats." Tears streamed down Rosalie's face. She thought of the locket of the faceless outlaw, and a terrible understanding began to dawn. Her father wasn't just afraid of financial ruin. He was terrified. "You'll pack Isabella's things," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You'll wear her dress. You'll stand in that church, and you'll say the vows she was supposed to say. And you will save this family." "What if he finds out?" She whispered the question, a fragile plea. "Then you make sure he doesn't," Thomas said, releasing her. He stepped back, his face settling into a mask of grim authority. "You keep your mouth shut. You do what he tells you. And you pray to God that a rich rancher's wife lives a better life than a poor shopkeeper's daughter. Now get dressed. His men will be here soon to escort you." Hours later, Rosalie stood in the parlor, a stranger in her cousin's traveling dress. It was too long, the waist too narrow, a constant physical reminder that she was an imposter. Isabella's trunk, filled with fine dresses and delicate shoes Rosalie had never imagined owning, stood by the door like a coffin. Thomas had burned Isabella's note, erasing the last piece of evidence, as if the flames could somehow purify his desperate act. When the knock came firm and authoritative, Rosalie's heart leaped into her throat. Thomas opened the door to two men, weathered ranch hands, whose kind eyes seemed jarringly out of place in this scene of deception. "Gentlemen," her father said, his voice overly cheerful, "you're here for my daughter Isabella." The older man, who introduced himself as Samuel Torres, Thornfield's foreman, tipped his hat. "Miss Chen, we're honored to escort you to Copper Creek Ranch. Mr. Thornfield's little girl Lucy has been counting the minutes." A child. Isabella had never mentioned a child. The world tilted again, the ground beneath Rosalie's feet turning to quicksand. She was not just deceiving a man. She was being sent to mother a child who was expecting someone else entirely. As Torres helped her into the waiting wagon, she did not look back at her father. She couldn't bear to see the mixture of guilt and relief she knew would be on his face. The wagon pulled away from the only home she had ever known, carrying her toward a life built on a lie, a silver locket tucked safely in her pocket, a cold weight against her heart. The 3-hour journey to Copper Creek Ranch was a slow, torturous crawl toward a fate Rosalie could not escape. Samuel Torres, bless his kind heart, tried to put her at ease. His talk filled with the simple, direct wisdom of a man who spent his life reading the land and the sky. He spoke of the ranch with a quiet pride, describing the scent of pine from the timber used to build the main house, the constant rhythmic creak of the windmill that was the ranch's heartbeat, and the way the red sand glowed like embers under the setting sun. "Mr. Thornfield's a good man," Torres said, his eyes on the horizon. "Hard, maybe. Grief will do that to a person. But fair. And he loves that little girl of his more than this whole territory. This marriage. It's all for her." Lucy Rosalie said, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. I, Lucy Torres, smiled. 7 years old. Lost her mama Elena when she was born. She's been asking everyone who'll listen when her new mama is coming home. That little one's been planning a welcome party for you for weeks. Each word was another stone laid on the crushing weight of Rosalie's guilt. This wasn't just a business arrangement between two men. This was about a child's desperate hope, a hope Rosalie was about to exploit and inevitably destroy. When they crested a final rise, the ranch spread out below them, a sprawling testament to prosperity and hard work, carved out of the rugged landscape. The main house was a 2-story structure of dark timber and fieldstone, with a wide porch and flower boxes overflowing with geraniums. But it was the small figure sitting on the top step of the porch that made Rosalie's heart clench. A little girl with a riot of dark curls, dressed in a bright blue dress, sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Her gaze was fixed on the approaching wagon with an intensity that seemed far too serious for her small face. "There she is," Torres said softly. "Been sitting right there since sunup, I'd wager." The wagon stopped. The world went silent, save for the creak of the windmill and the pounding of Rosalie's own blood in her ears. Torres helped her down, and she stood in the dusty yard, facing the child who was supposed to become her daughter. Lucy stood up her movements, careful and rehearsed, and walked slowly down the steps. She stopped a few feet from Rosalie, her wide, dark eyes searching Rosalie's face with a raw, heart-wrenching longing. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, in a voice that was small but clear as a bell, Lucy asked, "Are you my new mama?" The words punched the air from Rosalie's lungs. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She could only stare into the face of this beautiful, hopeful child and see the wreckage her deception would cause. Before she had to answer, Lucy stepped forward again, reaching into the pocket of her dress. She pulled out a small, slightly wilted bouquet of wildflowers tied with a piece of blue ribbon that matched her dress. "I picked these for you," she said, holding them out with both hands. "Papa said brides need flowers." Rosalie's hands shook as she accepted the small offering. They were simple prairie flowers, but they were offered with such solemn ceremony Such profound hope that they felt more precious than an armful of hothouse roses. "They're beautiful," Rosalie whispered. And the words were the first truth she had spoken all day. "Thank you, Lucy." A smile of such radiant joy broke across Lucy's face that Rosalie felt her own heart crack in two. The little girl took her hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong, and pulled her toward the house. "Come on. I helped Mrs. Rodriguez make your room special. Papa moved his things to the other room so you could have the big one with the best view." The house was cool and dark after the bright sun. It smelled of beeswax and baking bread. Lucy led her up a wide staircase to a large, airy bedroom. The bed was a massive four-poster, and on the vanity sat a silver-framed photograph of a woman with a gentle smile holding a baby. "That's my Mama Lucy," said her voice soft. "Her name was Elena. Papa says she would have liked you." The words were like knives. Rosalie turned away, unable to meet the photographed gaze of the woman she was replacing, the woman whose husband and child she was claiming under false pretenses. A heavy tread on the stairs announced a new arrival. A man appeared in the doorway, and Rosalie knew instantly that this was Marcus Thornfield. He was not what she had pictured. Taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and a lean, hard strength that spoke of a life of physical labor, not of a man who sat behind a desk. His dark hair had no trace of gray, and his face, though etched with lines of care, was handsome in a severe, rugged way. His eyes, a deep, startling brown, swept over her, taking in the ill-fitting dress, her trembling hands, her face. They were intelligent, measuring eyes, and for a terrifying second, Rosalie was certain he could see right through her. "Papa," Lucy cried, running to him. "She's here, and she's even prettier than her picture." Picture, another detail. Isabella must have sent one. Marcus rested a hand on his daughter's head, but his eyes never left Rosalie. "Welcome to Copper Creek, Miss Chen," he said, his voice a low baritone, clipped and pragmatic. It was the voice of a man who dealt in facts, not fantasies. "Thank you, Mr. Thornfield," Rosalie murmured, keeping her gaze lowered as her father had instructed. "The preacher will be here in an hour," he continued, his tone all business. "Mrs. Rodriguez will help you get ready. Lucy, come with me. Let's give your mother some time." He hesitated for only a fraction of a second over the word, but it was enough for Rosalie to know how strange it felt on his tongue. After they left, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, Mrs. Rodriguez bustled in to help her with Isabella's wedding dress. "Every bride is nervous, mija," she said soothingly, misinterpreting Rosalie's terror for bridal jitters. The dress, altered hastily that morning, was made of ivory silk that whispered as she moved. In the mirror, Rosalie saw a stranger, a pale, frightened woman, playing the part of a bride. She looked nothing like the vibrant, confident Isabella. How could Marcus Thornfield not see the difference? The ceremony was a surreal blur. It took place in the front yard under an arbor Lucy had decorated. As Torres walked her toward the preacher, she saw Marcus standing there, his jaw set, his expression unreadable. And beside him, her face shining with an almost holy joy, was Lucy. When the preacher asked, "Do you, Isabella Marie Chen, take this man?" Rosalie's throat closed. Her own middle name was Elena, a cosmic cruelty she was only just now appreciating. To say "I do" would be a lie spoken before God, but to refuse would be to shatter the heart of the small child watching her with such absolute trust. She looked at Lucy. And for her, for this child who deserved a mother, she committed her soul to the deception. "I do," she whispered. Marcus leaned in and brushed her cheek with his lips, a cool, perfunctory kiss that sealed their contract. But before he could pull away, Lucy launched herself at them, wrapping her arms around both their waists in a fierce, exuberant hug. Now we're a family. She cried, her voice ringing with a pure, uncomplicated happiness that made Rosalie's deception feel all the more profane. "Papa, can I call her Mama now?" Marcus looked down at his daughter, and for the first time, a genuine softness touched his features. "That's up to her, sweetheart." Lucy turned her pleading, hopeful eyes to Rosalie, and looking into that small, trusting face, Rosalie knew that whatever else happened, whatever price she eventually paid for this lie, she would protect this child's happiness for as long as she possibly could. "Yes," Rosalie said, her voice stronger now. "You can call me Mama." The smile that lit up Lucy's face was the first real and beautiful thing in Rosalie's new stolen life. In that moment, she made a silent vow. She might be a false wife, but she would be a true mother. It was a promise she feared would be impossible to keep. The first weeks of her marriage were a tightrope walk over a canyon of lies. Every day was a test. Every conversation was a potential misstep. She learned that Isabella had written to Marcus for months, creating a persona Rosalie could only guess at. In her letters, Isabella had claimed to be an accomplished cook, a skilled horsewoman, and an avid reader of classic literature. Rosalie could barely boil water without burning it, had ridden a horse only twice in her life, and preferred novels to poetry. She spent her days in a state of constant low-grade panic, relying on vague answers and feigned modesty to cover her ignorance. When Marcus asked her opinion on a passage from Virgil, she claimed a headache. When he offered to have a riding horse saddled for her, she pleaded fatigue from the journey. Her saving grace was Lucy. The child was her anchor and her shield. Lucy's bottomless need for a mother filled the empty spaces in Rosalie's days and gave her a purpose that felt real even when nothing else did. Rosalie learned the rhythm of her new daughter's life, the way she hummed when she was concentrating on her drawings, her fierce love for the stray cat that lived in the barn, her secret fear of thunderstorms. And in learning Lucy, Rosalie began to find pieces of herself she hadn't known existed. A well of patience she never had to draw from in the quiet mercantile. A capacity for fierce protective love that was as primal as breathing. One sweltering afternoon, she found Lucy by the creek, sobbing over a small bird with a broken wing. Lucy looked up at her, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "We have to help him, Mama. You're supposed to take care of things that are hurt and scared. That's what mamas do." The words were a perfect distillation of Lucy's worldview, a simple, powerful truth that cut through all of Rosalie's complicated fears. They splinted the wing with a twig and a strip of cloth from Rosalie's apron. They made a nest in a box and tried to feed the bird water from a spoon. Marcus found them in the kitchen, their heads bent together over their tiny patient. He didn't say anything, but stood in the doorway watching. Over Lucy's head, his eyes met Rosalie's, and she saw something in his gaze shift and soften. The pragmatic rancher, the grieving widower, was momentarily replaced by a man seeing not a contractual wife, but a woman tending to his child's heart. The bird died that night. Rosalie held Lucy as she cried, her small body racked with a grief that was too big for her. They buried it under the big cottonwood tree, and Lucy placed a wildflower on the small mound of earth. That night, tucked into bed, Lucy whispered, "I love you, Mama," and Rosalie whispered it back, stunned by the absolute truth of the words. She loved this child, desperately. Her relationship with Marcus remained a landscape of polite distances. They were partners in the business of raising Lucy, but not in life. They slept in separate rooms, and their conversations were confined to the safe topics of the ranch and their daughter. Yet things were changing. She saw him watching her more often, a thoughtful, questioning look in his eyes. He started talking to her about the ranch, not just as a courtesy, but as if he valued her opinion. He even smiled once, a small, rusty upturning of his lips, when she told a story about a particularly stubborn customer at the mercantile, a slip of her old life that she quickly covered. The shift culminated on a Saturday evening that began with a scream. It was a cry of pure terror from the barn, a sound that bypassed Rosalie's brain and went straight to her bones. She ran, her heart hammering, bursting into the dusty golden light of the barn, to see Lucy pressed against the far wall, her face a mask of white-hot fear. Coiled between the child and the door was a large rattlesnake, its tail a dry, menacing blur of sound. "Don't move, sweetheart," Rosalie said, her voice preternaturally calm. Her eyes darted around, landing on a long-handled pitchfork leaning against a stall. She had never held one before, had never imagined killing anything but the sight of that snake. The only thing between her and Lucy erased all hesitation. She was a mother, and a mother protects her child. She started moving slow and deliberate, placing herself between Lucy and the snake. The rattle grew louder, a sound that vibrated deep in her chest. Isabella Marcus's voice, sharp with alarm, came from behind her. He had been in the corral. "Rattlers," she said, her focus absolute. "Lucy's trapped. Step back, let me handle this." "No time," she said, the words tight. The snake's head was weaving, its black eyes fixed on her. "It's going to strike." It happened in a flash of terrifying speed. The snake lunged, a blur of patterned death. On pure instinct, Rosalie brought the pitchfork down a clumsy, desperate arc of motion. She felt the jarring impact as the tines hit their mark. Marcus was there, then pulling her back as the snake writhed and then lay still. Lucy flew into her arms, sobbing. "You saved me, Mama. You were so brave." Rosalie held her tight, shaking with a violent, full-body tremor. Marcus's hands were on her shoulders, steadying her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with a concern that was anything but businesslike. She shook her head, unable to speak. He knelt and checked Lucy over his hands, gentle. "You're safe, sweetheart. Your mama was very brave." Later that night, after Lucy was safely asleep, they sat on the porch. The silence between them was different now, charged with the residue of shared crisis. "Thank you," Marcus said finally, his voice low, "for what you did." "She's my daughter," Rosalie said, the words feeling more real than her own name. He turned to her, his face shadowed in the twilight. In her letters, he began slowly, Isabella wrote about wanting to be a mother. I confess, I thought it was what she assumed I wanted to hear. But you, what I saw today, that was real. He paused, searching for words. "I married you for Lucy. I never intended for this to be more. I told myself I could never feel for another woman what I felt for Alina. But watching you with Lucy, seeing what you were willing to do for her, I was wrong." Rosalie's breath caught. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her, the carefully constructed walls of their arrangement beginning to crumble. "Maybe this could be a real marriage, Isabella," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "Maybe we could be partners in all things." He was offering her everything she was secretly beginning to want. A home, a family, a partnership with this good, decent man who was slowly, cautiously opening his heart to her. But he was offering it to Isabella, to a ghost, to a lie. Every day she continued the deception. She burrowed deeper into his life, making the eventual discovery more catastrophic. The truth would not just hurt him, it would humiliate him. It would prove his judgment, his trust had been utterly misplaced. I need to check on Lucy," she stammered, rising abruptly and fleeing into the house, away from the hope and the terror in his eyes. She fled from the future he was offering, a future she desperately wanted but could never ever deserve. The telegram arrived 2 days later. Torres brought it from town with the mail. It was addressed to Mr. Marcus Thornfield. He opened it at the dinner table, his brow furrowed as he read the brief typed message. "Strange," he murmured. He looked at Rosalie, his expression puzzled. "It's for you, from a cousin of yours, a Robert Chen." Rosalie's blood turned to ice. She had no cousin named Robert Chen. "He says there's been a death in the family." Marcus continued, oblivious to the panic seizing her. "He's traveling from back east. Says it's urgent he speak with you in person. He should be here by the end of the week." A stranger was coming. A stranger claiming to be family, who would take one look at her and know she was an imposter. The tightrope she had been walking for weeks had just been cut. She was falling, and she had no idea how far the ground was below. The week leading up to Robert Chen's arrival was the longest of Rosalie's life. A powerful sandstorm was predicted for the end of the week, a fitting parallel to the tempest brewing in her soul. She went through the motions of her days in a daze of dread. Every smile from Lucy, every quiet, respectful glance from Marcus was another turn of the knife. She was a fraud, and her time was running out. He arrived on a Friday afternoon, just as the sky was beginning to take on a sickly yellowish hue, and the wind was starting to whip dust devils across the yard. He came not in a dusty carriage, but on a fine black stallion, looking less like a grieving relative and more like a gentleman gambler. Robert Chen was handsome in a sleek, polished way that seemed alien in the rugged landscape of Copper Creek. His suit was perfectly tailored, his boots shined to a mirror finish, and his smile was a flash of white that didn't reach his cold, intelligent eyes. As he dismounted, Rosalie noticed he was smoking a thin, dark cigar, and a chill of recognition went through her. The scent, a unique cloying mix of cherrywood and spice, was one she'd smelled before. A faint whiff of it had hung in the air on the street in Redemption right after the bank robbery. "Cousin Isabella," he said, his voice as smooth as oiled silk, as he took her hand and brushed his lips against her knuckles. "You are even more lovely than I was led to believe." His eyes held hers a moment too long, a subtle challenge in their depths. At dinner, he was the picture of charm, regaling them with stories of his travels. He spoke of the family of uncles and aunts Rosalie had never heard of, and she was forced to nod and murmur vague affirmations, praying he wouldn't ask a direct question she couldn't answer. She felt Marcus's gaze on her, felt his quiet confusion at her reticence. "Isabella seems to have forgotten much of her family history," Robert noted with a light chuckle, his eyes gleaming with amusement at her discomfort. "But then, a new marriage can be so consuming." Later, he found her alone in the parlor, under the pretense of admiring a painting. The wind was beginning to howl outside, rattling the window panes. "You play the part well?" he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The blushing bride, the doting mother. It's almost believable." Rosalie's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," he said, his smile turning sharp. "You see, I made it my business to learn all about my dear cousin Isabella before coming here. And the woman I learned about, vain, selfish, desperate to escape this life, doesn't quite match the woman I see before me. And then there's the matter of your name. It isn't Isabella, is it? It's Rosalie." The world spun, he knew how. "Isabella and I were corresponding," he said. "She had plans, big plans, and I was helping to finance them. She wrote to me the night she left, telling me her timid little cousin would be forced to take her place. She thought it was a grand joke." His expression darkened. "A joke that ended when she took my money and vanished, betraying me just as she betrayed everyone else. She ran away with the money I sent to help her escape." The secondary twist was a gut punch explaining the lawyer's letter and Isabella's utter disappearance. "What do you want?" Rosalie whispered, her voice trembling. I want what is owed to me. What is owed to my family," he said, his voice hardening. He stepped closer, his charm evaporating to reveal the cold menace beneath. "My father was Thomas Chen's partner in that mine." "Your father cheated him, Rosalie. He cooked the books, declared it a failure, and left my father with nothing. It destroyed him. He died a broken, penniless man. Thornfield might have forgiven the debt, but I have not. I am here to collect." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The robbery, the locket, it was all him. He hadn't just stumbled upon it. He had sought it out, a symbol of the family he intended to destroy. "You robbed the bank," she breathed. He smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. "A small withdrawal to cover my travel expenses. But now I'm here for the main prize. This ranch. Thornfield's fortune. Everything your father's betrayal built. And you, my dear cousin, are going to help me get it." He laid out his plan with cold precision. She would convince Marcus to invest in a new fraudulent mining venture. She would help him gain access to the ranch's books, to the safe. If she refused, he would tell Marcus everything. Over the next 2 days, the ranch became a prison. The sandstorm descended in full fury, a screaming yellow monster that blotted out the sun and trapped them all inside the house. The howling of the wind was a constant, nerve-shredding symphony that mirrored the turmoil in Rosalie's heart. Robert was a constant, menacing presence, his veiled threats and knowing looks following her everywhere. Marcus grew more and more withdrawn, his suspicion mounting as he witnessed the tense, whispered arguments between Rosalie and the man he believed to be her cousin. He misinterpreted the tension. Rosalie could see it in his eyes. He thought Robert was a former lover, a secret from Isabella's past, and a wall of cold jealousy was rising between them. The climax came on the 3rd night. The storm was at its peak, a biblical force that seemed intent on tearing the house from its foundations. A branch shattered a window in the dining room, and the lights, which had been flickering for hours, finally died, plunging them into the disorienting gloom of emergency lanterns. In the chaos, Robert made his move. He produced a pistol, the same one Rosalie had seen in the bank robber's hand, and grabbed Lucy, pulling the terrified child in front of him as a shield. "Nobody move," he snarled, the mask of civility gone completely. "Thornfield, the deed to this ranch. Sign it over to me now." Marcus, who had been trying to board the broken window, froze. "What is the meaning of this, Chen?" "My name is not Chen." Robert spat, his face contorted with years of hatred. "And her name," he said, jerking his head toward Rosalie, "is not Isabella." The truth, when it came, was brutal and unadorned. "She's Rosalie. The other one. The one they sent to trick you because your precious bride ran off. Her father and mine were partners. He destroyed my family. Now I'm destroying his. Sign the deed, or the girl dies." Rosalie saw Marcus's face in the flickering lamplight. The shock and the confusion, the dawning, sickening realization. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow, his expression crumbling into a mask of cold fury and pain. He looked at Rosalie, and in his eyes she saw the death of every soft feeling that had begun to grow between them. But there was no time for apologies or explanations. Lucy was whimpering, her small face buried in Robert's coat. "Let her go," Rosalie said, her voice shaking but clear. "This is between you and my father, not her." "She is the only thing he seems to care about," Robert sneered at Marcus. "A convenient point of leverage." Rosalie's mind raced faster than it ever had before. She couldn't overpower him. Marcus was unarmed. They were trapped. She had to think. What did she know that he didn't? She knew this house. She knew him. He was arrogant, monologuing, savoring his moment of victory. "You're wrong about my father," she said, forcing herself to meet Robert's crazed eyes. "You think he was some mastermind. He wasn't. He was just a coward. A weak man who made one bad decision after another. He was a thief." "Yes," she agreed, taking a step closer. "He was. But he wasn't smart enough to pull off what you think he did. My father never cooked any books. He didn't have the head for it. The mine failed because he was a fool who listened to bad advice. There was no conspiracy, just failure. She was gambling, trying to chip away at the foundation of his lifelong vendetta. She could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. His entire identity was built on this story of betrayal. "You're lying," he hissed, but his grip on Lucy loosened fractionally. "Am I?" Rosalie took another step. She was close to the fireplace now, her hand brushing against the heavy iron poker that rested on the hearth. "You've spent your whole life hating a phantom. A villain you built in your mind because it was easier than accepting that sometimes things just fall apart. Sometimes there is no one to blame." As she spoke, she locked eyes with Marcus. She tilted her head ever so slightly toward the boarded-up window behind him. "Diversion." He gave a barely perceptible nod. "Sign the deed," Robert screamed, his composure cracking. At that exact moment, Marcus kicked the flimsy boards from the broken window. They crashed to the floor with a deafening noise. The wind shrieked into the room, extinguishing 2 of the lanterns and sending papers flying. For a split second, Robert was distracted, his head jerking toward the sound. It was all the time Rosalie needed. She grabbed the poker and swung it with all her strength, not at his head, but at his gun hand. The heavy iron connected with a sickening crack. The pistol flew from his grasp, skittering across the floor. Lucy Freed ran screaming toward Marcus. Robert lunged for Rosalie, his face a mask of pure rage, but before he could reach her, the kitchen door burst open. Torres and 2 other ranch hands, drawn by the gunshot-like sound of the crashing boards, stood there, rifles raised. Robert froze, his hands slowly rising in surrender. The storm outside raged on, but the one inside the house was finally over. In the gray, quiet aftermath of the storm, the world felt raw and exposed. The sheriff had come and gone, taking a sullen, defeated Robert Chen with him. The broken window was properly boarded, the shattered glass swept away. But the wreckage in the heart of the house remained. Marcus had not spoken a word to her since Robert's capture. He had held Lucy, murmuring reassurances, his eyes fixed on his daughter, pointedly avoiding Rosalie's gaze. The silence was a condemnation heavier than any accusation. When Lucy finally fell into an exhausted sleep in his arms, he carried her upstairs. Rosalie followed her feet like lead. He laid Lucy in her bed, then turned to face Rosalie in the hallway. The lamplight carved deep shadows into his face, making him look like a stranger. "Get your things," he said, his voice flat dead. "I want you gone by morning." "Marcus, please." She whispered, tears she had held back all night finally spilling over. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" He shot back, his voice a low, vicious snarl. "Explain that my entire marriage is a lie. That the woman I have been sharing my home with, trusting with my child, is a fraud. That I have been made a fool of by you and your pathetic, scheming father." "It wasn't like that. I was forced." "I don't care." He cut her off, his pain making him cruel. "Every moment, every word between us has been a lie. Did you ever feel anything real, or was it all part of the performance?" Before she could answer, a small voice came from the bedroom doorway. Papa Lucy stood there, clutching her rag doll, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't send Mama away. Please, I need her." Marcus's anger seemed to falter, the hard lines of his face softening as he looked at his daughter. "She saved me. Lucy insisted, her voice trembling. Robert was bad, but Mama saved me. Please don't make her leave. She ran to Rosalie, wrapping her small arms around her legs, a tiny, fierce protector. Marcus stared at them, his face a battleground of conflicting emotions, the sting of betrayal, the weight of his responsibility to his child, and the undeniable truth of what Lucy had said. Rosalie had saved her. Her love for Lucy, at least, had been real. He ran a hand over his face, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I can't think about this right now. He looked at Rosalie, his eyes filled with a weary pain. Don't leave. Not yet. For her. But don't think for a second that this changes anything between us. He turned and walked down the hall to his own room, closing the door behind him with a soft final click. Rosalie knew then what she had to do. She couldn't fix what was broken between her and Marcus, while the original sin remained unaddressed. She had to confront her father. She had to break the cycle of deceit that had started with him. The next morning she rode one of the ranch horses into Redemption. She found her father in the mercantile, packing a crate with frantic, clumsy movements. He was planning to flee. He looked up when she entered, his face a mixture of fear and guilt. Rosalie, I heard what happened. You lied to me, she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. It wasn't just a debt. It was a betrayal. You ruined Robert Chen's father. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. It was a long time ago. I made a mistake. You made a choice, she corrected him, and you've been making them ever since. You chose to send me in Isabella's place. You chose to lie to me, to Marcus, to everyone. You built our lives on a foundation of secrets and fear, and last night it all came crashing down. She placed the silver locket on the counter between them. I am done with your lies, Papa. I am done being a part of them. She saw the fight go out of him, leaving behind a frail, broken old man. What will you do? He whispered. I'm going to go back and try to build a life on the truth, she said. And you? You have to live with the choices you've made. She turned and walked out of the store, not looking back, leaving him alone with his conscience and his consequences. The ride back to Copper Creek was filled with uncertainty. She had no idea if Marcus would even let her in the house. But as she rounded the final bend, she saw him waiting on the porch steps, just as Lucy had been on the day she arrived. He stood as she dismounted. He looked tired, but the cold fury was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, contemplative sorrow. I thought you had left for good, he said. I had to face my father, she replied. I had to end the lies. They stood in silence for a long moment. Lucy is right, he said finally. You saved her. Whatever lies brought you here, your love for her is real. The bravest thing I have ever seen. He took a step closer. I have spent the last day thinking about Alina. I thought my love for her meant I could never love again. I thought keeping her memory pure meant keeping my heart locked away. But I was wrong. I was just hiding. He looked at her, and his eyes were clear, honest, and vulnerable. I don't know Isabella Chen. I never did. But I am beginning to know Rosalie, and I think she is a woman of great courage and a deep heart. I was falling in love with you, Rosalie, even when I thought you were someone else. Tears filled her eyes. Marcus? Stay, he said simply. Not as an arrangement. Not as Lucy's mother. Stay as my wife. As Rosalie. A month later, a letter arrived, postmarked from San Francisco. It was from Isabella. In it, she confessed everything, apologizing for the chaos she had caused. She had met a man on the way to California, a wealthy prospector, and had married him. Enclosed was a bank draft for the money she had taken from Robert Chen, with a short dismissive note that it was a debt she was glad to be rid of. It was a final, clean break, closing a chapter that had almost destroyed them. Months later, on a warm spring morning, Rosalie stood with Marcus and Lucy at Alina's grave. She laid a small bouquet of wildflowers on the stone, not as a replacement, but as a woman paying her respects. Then Marcus took her hand and led her to a small rise overlooking the creek. "We'll build the new schoolhouse here," he said, "for Lucy and for all the ranch children to come." He reached into his pocket and pulled out her mother's silver locket, which the sheriff had recovered and returned. He pressed it into her hand. "A new beginning," he said softly. That evening, Rosalie placed the locket on the mantelpiece in their living room, its silver glowing in the warm light of the fire. It rested there not as a symbol of debt and deception, but as a testament to a painful past that had against all odds led to a future built on truth, forgiveness, and a love that was stronger for having survived the storm.